Oh, wait, hold on.
This one. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Okay, I'm going. Wait.
Amit, Angus.
Which one?
Yes, 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 yes.
All right. So mass adoption. It's not going to happen easy, and it's going to take a lot of work, but the founders and the builders in this space, I'm confident that they have the perseverance and the dedication and just the will to make this happen. And we're used to jumping through hurdles, going over speed bumps, and really striving to make it successful and to reach the bottom line and to hit our end game. So it's really fun to hear from both of them. I think they're both brilliant minds in this space. And we're going to gear up now for more of a strategic session. So going along the lines of mass adoption, how do we capture those users? What is necessary to make that happen with the tech, making it seamless, something that the user interacts with without even potentially knowing they're interacting with blockchain. We are going to go now to the strategy part of our session. We've got strategies for a unified Web3. That's another word that I've been hearing a lot of lately. Unify, coming together, uniting. This space is about collaboration, not competition. And that's something really special and a little bit different than Web2. So I'd like to welcome our speakers onto the stage now. Angus, from Foundation Lead at Stargate Foundation. Robinson, co-founder of Wormhole. Tim, managing partner at Psalion, and moderator Amit Mehra, partner at Borderless Capital. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Awesome. So very good afternoon, guys. So I think we have a star-studded panel here on interoperability and a unified Web3, which is, I think, one of the key themes, right now with explosion in the number of L1s and L2s. So I think to start off, maybe we can start with quick intros and then jump into some of the discussions. So very quickly, I'll do a quick intro on myself. I'm with Borderless Capital. We are a Web3 VC fund. Over 300 portfolio companies now, currently deploying from one fund which is focused on interoperability. We are working with a number of key crypto institutions, including 15 key L1s, and a bunch of these guys. The second one focused on Deepin, and the third is a liquid fund. Would love for you guys to give a little bit of intro about yourself and the project and what you guys do.
Sure. So my name is Angus, or Lams. I lead the Stargate Foundation. Stargate Finance is the largest bridge in DeFi at the moment. It was the first and still is the largest application built on top of Layer 0. Layer 0 is a general messaging protocol that allows communication between different blockchains.
Hey, everyone. My name is Robinson. I co-founded the Wormhole Foundation. Wormhole is effectively a way in which blockchains can communicate. So we connect about 40 chains today, and we have a number of different applications that build on top of this messaging infrastructure that we've built.
My name is Tim Enneking. I'm the managing partner of Psalion. Psalion has a venture capital fund that does pre-seed and seed stage. We just pretty much finished wrapping up Vintage 2. Now we're launching Vintage 3, probably late this year or very early next year. And then we also have what we understand is the largest yield farming operation in Europe.
Awesome, awesome. So I think very diverse panels. Maybe to kick off, both Angus, you and Robinson, maybe what are some unique attributes that you think, which are unique to the solutions you guys bring to the table?
Yeah, happy to kick off and talk about kind of Layer 0 as a messaging protocol. I think when thinking about interoperability solutions, there are really three things that make Layer 0 stand out. The first one being immutability. And speaking as a kind of developer who builds an application on top of Layer 0 as well, having a messaging protocol that is entirely immutable is incredibly important for kind of future-proofing any application that you're developing. So all of the contracts that Layer 0 deploys, all of their messaging endpoints are entirely immutable, all open source. Very easy for a developer to know that as someone who's deploying an application on top of these endpoints across 70 different blockchains, nothing that Layer 0 Labs or any entity can do is going to change the way that my application is interacting with that messaging protocol. And I think we had, Austin was on stage earlier who mentioned that bridging is, in its nature, quite a difficult thing to do. There are lots of different vulnerabilities, and so having immutable contracts, ensuring that no developer either maliciously or accidentally can push any kind of bad code that would then destroy the security of some of the applications built on top of it is incredibly important. I think the second point that I would touch on is censorship resistance. And so again, similarly, as an application built on top of Layer 0, there's nothing that anybody involved with the messaging protocol or the developers behind it can do to prevent a message from going through. So when I initiate a transaction on the source chain, there's nothing that any of the security stack can do within Layer 0 that would prevent that message from reaching destination kind of with its intended goal of executing some logic on the destination chain. And then the final thing being kind of permissionless. I think one of the important things within our ecosystem that a lot of people talk about is permissionlessness and the ability for everybody to contribute to either, whether it be the security aspect or the execution aspect, to participate in that stack. And so again, as a developer on top of the Layer 0 messaging protocol, it's incredibly important that Stargate can decide what level of the stack it wants to build on top of. So what level of security does it want? What sort of execution does it want on the destination side? And that kind of configurability really is incredibly important when building applications on Layer 0.
Robinson?
Yeah, I think Angus mentioned a lot of like the core tenets that the space believes is important. I think it's helpful to like define interoperability, some common misconceptions before like jumping into it. So the way I like to think about, or at least the Wormhole contributors like to think about the space, is you kind of have what we view as like the messaging or communication layer, and then you have the asset layer, right? And this concept, interoperability, it's not new. It's something that we use in other industries as well, right? It's this idea of two separate systems that don't talk to each other. How do you create almost like this translation or communication layer? So a good example would be, we're all familiar with Swift, right? We have all these banking systems that don't speak to each other, have different protocols. How do you like make a common language in which these two entities or more than two entities can communicate? I think for the US in particular, they have a bunch of different hospital systems. And then there's how do you make sure that patient data can move from these different hospital systems, right? This is just a concept of interoperability. And what we're doing is taking this concept and applying that to blockchains, right? You have an Ethereum blockchain that we're mostly familiar with in Solana. It's different protocol, different token standards. So ultimately, like Wormhole becomes the way in which you can kind of communicate all these things back and forth. So now we've established like, okay, there's this messaging layer. There's this like core primitive. How we see like things above that is what we call the asset layer, application layer. You can kind of blend the two, but we focus a lot on, we have the core primitive, but if you're actually building something, it can be really difficult to build multi-chain, right? If I'm a developer, I want to go to market as quickly as possible, as securely as possible too, and not spend multiple years maybe building an application. So we focus a lot on things to help make building multi-chain applications easier. So multi-chain governance, you could think about it like an API, push messaging, pull messaging, front ends, different things like that, so that like ultimately everyone sitting here, like if you're going to use something, any sort of front end, you don't necessarily have to care as much. I think you'll always have to know maybe what chain your wallet's on, things like that, but you won't have to care as much about necessarily what chain you're on and all the complexities that come with that. And then the other thing, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but like if all of, like, let's say we have a big responsibility, right? It's like, it's infrastructure. So it's important that it's decentralized, so not one party or a few parties can take it over, and it's important that it's extremely secure. And it's, when we talk about infrastructure, I oftentimes use analogies, but I think about it just like any sort of city, right? Like anything that is going to have a lot of people relying on it, almost like mindlessly going about their lives, you need to make sure that it's sturdy. Maybe a subway is a good example. You want to make sure it arrives on time. You can trust it. And so that's the same thing with Wormhole or any messaging provider. So we put a lot of work into how we think about security, having our own kind of model, and then, of course, you can choose other models as well. But yeah, hopefully that's kind of helpful in understanding the space and at least how Wormhole thinks about it.
Awesome, awesome. And maybe, Tim, from your point of view, as a VC fund, like how do you think of interoperability? How do you think the space is involved from your vantage point?
Well, it's funny because, say, 3 years ago, there was very little focus on interoperability. There are projects working on it, but there really wasn't a lot of general attention paid to it. And now, you look at different blockchains, different structure, different concepts, a lot less different than I like to think they are from one another, right, at the end of the day. But many of them have advantages, and many of them have USPs. But there's not a single blockchain that does everything well or does everything the best. And from a user standpoint, and from a venture capital standpoint, interoperability has become really important because it makes the choice easier. I don't have to bet on 10 different horses on 10 different blockchains and hope one of them wins. So there are projects we've invested in, like Utila, out of the, 25 or so we've done over the past couple of years. And one of the things we love about that project is they work, I think, on 7 blockchains as of today, and we use them. They're a custodian. We use them, and when we want them to add another blockchain because we're dealing with another protocol on our yield farming side, really quickly is a couple weeks, maybe it's a couple months, depending on the complexities involved. But they expand their core technology to another blockchain. So now you have projects that are becoming blockchain agnostic and taking advantage of whatever the USP is on a given blockchain, depending on what their customer drivers are, depending on what their customers are looking for. And that's gone from being really not a main consideration in terms of picking a project we want to invest in to one of the primary considerations of one of the projects we'd invest in.
Awesome, awesome. I think some great thoughts, and kind of probing a little bit. You mentioned some of the core tenets which are needed. You mentioned like the messaging layer and the asset layer. Delving deeper a bit, is there some trade-off? Usually does interoperability come with a trade-off, maybe on the UX side, security side? Have you all seen that?
Yeah, I think there are naturally trade-offs when talking about interoperability. You lose some atomicity because you are executing across different execution environments. And I think, as Robinson just pointed out, when you're building an interoperability protocol, you really need to make sure that if one layer, one part of the security stack fails, you are not destroying the security of every application built on top of that messaging protocol. And I think that's something that Layer 0 does quite well, where, as I said, each application that is building is able to select their kind of isolated security stack. So a simple $1 NFT project that maybe wants to deploy across a bunch of different chains doesn't need the same level of security as Swift or maybe hospital data. And in 2019, 2020, I wrote my master's thesis on interoperability between different blockchains from a data health record perspective. And at that point, as you pointed out, there really wasn't much conversation about interoperability. But I think there's been a lot of development over the past 3 or 4 years. And I think one thing that we have learned is you don't want to corrupt the entire application layer on top of the messaging protocol if there's any issues with a certain portion of the security stack. And so within Layer 0 messaging, you have this concept of decentralized verified network where each application selects the DVNs that they want to choose. And so Stargate, for example, is built on top of the Stargate DAO DVN as well as a couple other DVNs. And if the Stargate DAO DVN is corrupted or is malicious, that doesn't affect anybody who is not using the Stargate DAO DVN or that specific security set. And I think that's incredibly important, is one of the kind of trade-offs when looking across some of the other messaging protocols out there, is that corrupting the state or corrupting the security level of that messaging protocol actually, because of the shared security model that some other protocols have, really kind of can ruin the security of some of those applications.
Yeah, I want to be honest here. I know panels are like way more fun when people disagree. I tend to roughly agree with what Angus is saying. I think the most important concept I think to take away from this is like security means a lot, because you have this like compounding effect of applications that rely on a bridge. Same thing with like any blockchain mental model, right? Like you have this compounding effect of more applications building on the blockchain. If something were to happen in the underlying blockchain that affects all these applications, like it could be like disastrous, just for lack of a better word. But I think when thinking about interoperability, I don't like to overcomplicate it too much. I think the trade-offs are largely similar to like anything else in this space, right? Like if something goes too fast, moves too fast, look under the hood, they're probably cutting corners somewhere, right? Like it maybe is a little bit more centralized, or maybe trusting, just a few people with everything, right? And so we tend to take a similar approach around security, right? So we have, at the asset layer, we have a product called native token transfers. So you're essentially able to use whatever transceiver or whatever security configuration you want in order to send an asset from chain A to chain B. And then we have the Guardian network, which is like our default network, I guess you can say. And that is where most of the messages, or how most of the messages on the Wormhole network today go through and are attested on a given destination chain. So I think like the answer to this to me is there's nothing about interoperability in particular. I think maybe you would magnify the fact that security is more important, but it's the same trade-offs you get with the rest of the space, right? Open source versus closed source, the implications there, immutable, upgradable implications there, speed versus going more methodically, et cetera. Yeah.
Tim, anything to add to that? Any trade-offs you have seen in?
It's quite funny. Some people consider me a crypto heretic, although I've been in the space since, 2013, because I think crypto in general is evolutionary, much more than it's revolutionary. And Robinson, listening to what you said, was we want to be decentralized on the one hand, secure on the other hand. And I think to myself, okay, so you want to make a left turn on the one hand, and you want to make a right turn on the other hand, because there's an aphorism that's well older than I am, and I'm probably the youngest guy on the panel up here. And the aphorism was, if you want to have security, you can't have operations, and if you want to have operations, you can't have security. Security and decentralized really are designed not to live together. They are really antithetical to one another. So it is very, very difficult to build those. And when you add additional blockchains where you have a stable environment here and a stable environment here, but you have something moving between them that is by definition less stable, it's tough. So interoperability is a very, very difficult task, because it's being asked to do two things that are mutually contradictory. But because of guys like you, it's actually happening, but it's really not easy. And I love what you just said. If they're moving too fast, they're taking shortcuts. They're doing something wrong, because the complexities are really, really manifold.
And just one thing to add to that, I think that when this kind of industry started, I think everyone kind of came from this position of being a decentralized maxi, or like things need to be as decentralized as possible. I still think that core tenet rings true, but I think we're just like reevaluating what needs to be extremely decentralized versus what can maybe you can make a little bit more sacrifices, right? Like core infrastructure, for instance, like Ethereum, most people would argue needs to be sufficiently or very, very much so decentralized. But maybe there's a world where certain applications don't need, this like robust set of validators that's numbers in the multi-thousands. Maybe they could have, in the tens, the teens, et cetera.
Well, let me throw this out as a thesis. I've never had this thought before, but you just stimulated it. When crypto started way back when, right, it was really, call it a libertarian movement, right? But it was, everybody knew everybody else. It was a very, much more of a clubbish atmosphere. The first concern on everybody's mind was, I'm going to get gamed, I'm going to get hacked, I'm going to get attacked, right? And as crypto has gotten bigger, as the amounts involved have gotten bigger, I think there's probably been a shift where instead of primarily working on building and really only working on building, people have to, they're still working on building, but they're looking over their shoulder all the time because they know whatever they build, someone's going to come after it. And you know that's going to happen.
I am personally of the opinion that we need to make crypto cypherpunk again. I think a lot of people have as you said, in the very early days of crypto, a lot of people were very focused on decentralization and solving truly hard problems and really iterating and innovating. And I think as more people have come into the space, a lot of people have wanted to cut corners and they wanted to move fast and break things. And I personally prefer if we moved faster and broke less things. But I think the important thing is that we can't stray away from some of the tenets that I raised earlier on. Some of the things that crypto is foundationally built upon. If we stray too far towards decentralization, I think we risk just rebuilding the financial system we're trying so hard to get away from.
Okay, now I'm going to take Robinson up on his advice, and I will respectfully disagree, at least tangentially, with you, Angus. And that is that I think it's impossible for crypto to not drift away. And I also think that's a good thing. I once used a metaphor on a webinar for a company, and the moderator loved it. And ever since then, it's BWG. They call me back all the time for this. And I said, look, you have to look at crypto, and you have to look at the fiat financial system as Hegelian dialectic. And for those of you who studied Hegel, right, he was the guy, you have a thesis, which is the starting point. In our case, that's fiat. You have the antithesis, and for the purpose of this discussion, let's say that's crypto, because there's certainly a lot of crypto that's antithetical to fiat. And then you have the synthesis. And Marx and Engels took that and made communism out of it, but that's a different story. Here, let's talk about the financial system. Because I think that we are going to leave it behind in the main. There will be projects that are more faithful to the origins of crypto. But ultimately, we're going to see a synthesis that takes advantage of the good that's in both systems. Because the fiat system, while so screwed up in a lot of ways, is not completely hopeless. And crypto is way too idealistic in a lot of ways, and we've seen the disadvantage of that. But it came up a couple panels ago here, people talking about M&A and the fact that Robinhood bought Bitstamp. I'm still like absorbing that information, but that to me is a fabulous bit of news because the fiat world isn't completely screwed up. The crypto world is not completely perfect, but there's a synthesis there that's going to emerge, and I think that will be better than both.
Yeah,
so, tangential disagreement.
I'll take your tangential disagreement and agree with it. Actually,
damn. Sorry.
Bringing it back to kind of interoperability. I think when talking about messaging standards and a unified Web3, it's incredibly important that the interoperability protocol that's going to power the future of different blockchain ecosystems is built as unopinionated as possible. And so application developers are ultimately the ones who are going to decide whether or not they want to make that trade-off. They are the ones who decide, do I want to go the cypherpunk route and have everything as decentralized as possible? There's no multi-sigs. I'm going to create all of my various security stacks, and everything's going to be validating the entire Ethereum light node. Or am I building a simple application? I can take a lot of short corners. I can take some centralization risk. And ultimately, being built on top of layer 0, you're able to price yourself along that kind of cost versus security curve. I think that's incredibly important.
Well, let me take, you guys were talking about interoperability, and it's a unified Web3, which is not exactly interoperability. But let me take the question of interoperability and push you two in particular, because we just invest in it. You guys do the real work, right? And that is, why does interoperability stop with crypto? Because one of my phrases I like to say is, crypto needs the blockchain, but the blockchain doesn't need crypto. And now there's more and more of the fiat world that is using the blockchain. Not so much crypto, JPM coin, all due respect, but why does interoperability stop at the confines of crypto?
It doesn't. Well, just in general, the term, I think, as I mentioned earlier, can apply to like a lot of different industries. I think it's just like
your metaphors were great.
Yeah, a broad term we've just reused and taken for our own, like we normally do in crypto. But yeah, I think simply it doesn't. I think we see it in a lot of different systems, and then like just to use your example, like there is a lot of private blockchains now that want to connect to public blockchain networks, right? We can think about it as, you know, I hate using internet analogies because I think everyone does this, and sometimes they're applicable, sometimes they're not. But you know, wanting to connect to the open web versus the closed web, right? Like a wormhole or a layer 0 in this instance can be the way in which these like closed systems connect to the open system. And I think when you think about like the fiat world, as you explained it, or like institutions, like a lot of them today are tokenizing assets on chain, and then they're saying, hey, I've done a lot of work to be on this one chain. They could either spend the time and figure out how to go and deploy this across all these other chains, different virtual machines, languages, et cetera, or they could work with an interoperability partner and say like, okay, I'm going to deploy and start tokenizing assets, bringing them on chain out here, and then I'm just going to work with a wormhole to go to all these different chains out of the box. You save on audit costs, you save on time, opportunity cost, et cetera. So I think the answer is like, it doesn't stop.
There's a really good example of that, as strange as it sounds, in bond trading settlement. Fiat bond trading settlement, because there are at least 3 companies in 3 different continents, big fiat names, that are using 3 different blockchains to settle their bond trades right now. And so you look at that and think, oh my God, what chaos. But if you have bridges that aren't necessarily crypto dependent, but you have bridges like you guys are building and that you're talking about, then suddenly you have Web3 developments, interoperability developments that become critical for, again, I pick on JP Morgan, to settle its bond trades, which is like, if you had 3 years ago said something like that on a stage like this, people would really ask you what drugs you were taking so they could borrow some, right? But we're there.
Yeah, and I think the conclusion, I suppose, to draw on that is that there are a lot of different components that make up the kind of blockchain ecosystem today, and there are some off-chain components. There are different execution environments, but I think if for the next, call it 5 years, if we are looking to scale to the next 1 billion users, the next 2 billion users, that probably cannot happen on one single execution environment. And there still will be factors outside of that execution environment that you want to take in. And so I think that's where a lot of these interoperability protocols play a very, very important role over the next few years.
I think somebody, yesterday, I think great discussion. Somebody yesterday, they said a comment, and, I was thinking about it. Maybe they are in the audience. They said, like, Bitcoin really derives its value from fiat. If you remove fiat, how does Bitcoin get its value? So that got me a little bit thinking, but I think that was a great discussion. We are coming towards the end. So I think, as somebody who is sitting here in the audience as a developer, right, and he's thinking about, okay, I want to develop my application in one chain, and, I want to, tap users, liquidity dApps across ecosystems, think cross-chain. So what is the future like for each of you guys? Maybe what do you think is the future of interoperability? How does this space pan out?
Yeah, so you just mentioned building your own execution environment, or maybe you're building an application on a new execution environment, and you mentioned liquidity. So I'd be remiss not to mention Stargate just launched Stargate V2, which alongside it has something called Hydra, which is sort of a bridging as a service that allows new applications, new chains that are launching to access liquidity from all of the other chains that Stargate has launched on. Stargate V1 launched 2.5 years ago, and so I think we've been thinking about the world that we are in today. And at the time, it launched on 7 chains, then it ended up expanding to 13. And I think I've spoken to the leaders of probably about 150 to 200 different blockchains now. And so I think what we've released with Stargate V2 is really one of the only solutions, if not the only solution, that's able to expand into all of the different L2s, L3s, app chains that we're seeing today. And obviously that is empowered by layer 0 messaging.
Yeah, I think when we think about building multi-chain, things like that, like Wormhole, this core messaging layer, or even just a layer 0 is like just the beginning. It's almost like, and I'll just continue to use analogies because they're helpful. It's like Stripe is like facilitates payments. It's like, okay, great, but like why do people use it? Why do developers use Stripe? It's because if you want to do anything with payments, they give you 7 different things to make everything out of the box, right? They'll give you an SDK, they'll give you some sort of front end, and all of a sudden, like, you're building a website, and Stripe can literally do everything for payments for you. It's so easy, it's all composable, et cetera. So when we think about interoperability, we see Wormhole as like, okay, great, we've got this like secure core primitive, but like when we think about an app builder, like let's put an app builder into like better terms here, like an entrepreneur that wants to build something in crypto, right? When we think about that and how they're thinking about trade-offs go to market, they need like, they're thinking about so much, like the actual network expansion or expanding across these chains, like realistically, like we want to make it as out of the box as possible. Again, we've talked a lot about cutting corners and speed, and out of the box sometimes can seem like a term that would derive the fact that we're maybe doing that. But I think the core tenet here is that we have Wormhole as this core messaging layer. Now, what are all the tools that you have to go along with it to make it super easy, right? And we have your push messaging, so you can push data cross-chain. You can pull data cross-chain. You can relay the data out of the box. You have a front end that you can use, right? We do a lot in governance now. If your token exists on multiple chains, how do the token holders on one chain make sure that they can vote and participate? If they take their token to Solana from Ethereum, can they no longer like vote? Oh, sure, maybe they could bridge the asset, but wouldn't it be easier if they could just vote from the other chain, right? So I think for us, we think a lot about like what are those additional tools on top of this core layer? And then I said this earlier, but like thinking from a business perspective, like I don't want to take the time to figure out how I'm going to deploy on multiple different virtual machines, right? Like I want my application to be accessible to as many users, to as much liquidity as possible. I want to deploy on Sui, Solana, Wormhole, Ethereum, Cosmos, and so on, right? And so making that like as easy as possible, I think is how we think about it.
So we have another acronym, Angus. I like it. BaaS, right? Blockchain, or sorry, bridging as a service. I love it. That's a new one for me. One of the things I had to do was parachute down in one of our investee companies. And so I took it over. It's this thing called Presearch, a Web3 search engine. And it's really interesting because when I took over, it's on Ethereum, but that's really too expensive to do anything. Then we're adding Base, Coinbase's latest blockchain, because it really works well as Web3 with Web3 wallets. And then we're also adding Cosmos as just because we have millions of transactions a day, and they have to be essentially free for it to make any economic sense. And so we're using 3, or going to use 3, and we're going to move freely between them, and that's really turning into the DNA of the project. And that is something that was inconceivable even a couple of years ago, to have a single project that would build different aspects, like I said before, based on the USPs of different blockchains. It's fabulous to be able to do that now, and it was impossible not long ago.
Awesome, awesome. I think we are about time, but I want to give the opportunity, maybe just one question from the audience, if anybody has one question that they want to ask before we wrap up. Yeah. Sure, go ahead. Is there a talk loud? Just
speak up.
Yeah, so the question was, what are our thoughts on programmable wallets and kind of programmable operations and payments? And I think you raised a good point that kind of smart wallets or smart account wallets are very new to the space, and a lot of people are still kind of interacting with simple EOAs at the moment. And I think the future hopefully does look like kind of a gas abstracted, payment abstracted, smart account wallet future. And I know Coinbase specifically released their Web3, their smart wallet a couple days ago. So you can use it on Stargate. I think it's a very, very interesting future, because a lot of the things that we've spoken about, both from the developer perspective, but also the user perspective, makes it such that we probably won't get to 1 billion users with our current the way that we're built currently. And I think something like smart wallets will help my parents on board, will help my girlfriend on board. I think there are a lot of people that are kind of scared of on-chain and hear a lot of terrible stories of hacks and security issues. And I think something like smart account wallets that abstract a lot of those complexities, what chain you're on, do you have gas, is your gas held in your Coinbase account, or is it held on chain, is it held on the right chain? I think being able to interact with something like the Coinbase Smart Wallet across a lot of different chains and using something like Stargate built on Layer 0 or an application built on Wormhole, using something like that is super valuable.
I think time is up, so maybe we can continue the conversation.
We can take
I'm happy to meet with you after and chat more before getting kicked off. But I've
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
We're
Really
being
appreciate
thrown
it.
out. Thank you.
Sorry. No, yeah, fantastic. I would have loved to hear all day from them, and I really wanted to hear that question, actually. I got the pleasure of being able to listen in with you guys. That was pretty cool.